hope you all are doing well. My name is Sidharth Shulka. I have around 11 years of expertise into different types of automation, starting from web, mobile devices automation, and API automation. I do have expertise into some of the DevOps and CI/CD part also. Our today's topic is mostly focused on mobile automation, and as Appium is one of the most used test automation framework for mobile devices, so our this series of videos will be focused on the tutorial from scratch of using Appium for mobile devices, right? So we will go through about Appium introduction, how basically Appium works in this particular session, and then in the next session we will try to understand installation of Appium, and then slowly we will move into designing a Appium automation framework and running the scripts on mobile devices and cloud devices. So let's start with the session. Why is mobile testing required? This is kind of a minimum bare idea we should have before we jump into working on mobile automation testing with Appium. So basically in the last decade, the number of mobile users has been exponentially increased, right? And in fact, 2/3 of world's population is using mobile devices. And we all know that in each mobile device we have many type of mobile applications that we use in our day-to-day life, right? For example, your Facebook, for example, LinkedIn, right? Zomato. So in almost all kind of business, people are using mobile applications. In fact, most of the product companies also trying to launch the mobile version of their application, both supporting Android and iOS. Due to this large shift in demand, and the number of apps as increasing since last 10 years, it has also put a lot of work on the QA team to make sure that whatever applications that we are getting in App Store is having the bare minimum quality, so that the user will be easily able to use it and the product will have better reach in the public, right? So it's kind of a directly proportional relationship. The number of apps is increasing, so definitely the testing demand is also increasing. And when the testing demand increases, definitely at some point of time it would be quite difficult to manage it manually, right? And that's where the automation comes into picture, right? So basically automation comes into picture when there are repetitive steps are there, multiple sets of test data requirement is there. The same scenario comes for mobile also. When there is a lot of repetitive scenarios we need to perform in mobile testing, or we need to support multiple devices or multiple mobile operating system like Android and iOS, at that point of time we need help of automation, right? So that we can create a test suite and it would be easy for us to create smoke and regression on top of it, right? Our next question that we will try to answer is, what is Appium? By now we understood that why basically mobile testing is required and where basically the automation of mobile application comes into picture. So now we will understand about Appium. Appium is an open source test automation framework. What do we mean by that? That whenever we try to automate the test scenarios using any automation scripts, in that case what basically we need a framework or a tool which will help us to interact with the mobile elements, right? What do we mean by that? For example, you have an application, right, called as LinkedIn. Now you want to open the LinkedIn application, you want to log in and check that the login has been successfully done or not. In that case, you need the help of some frameworks or tool which will help to interact with the application in the mobile device and perform the action. For that, basically, we need a framework, right? And Appium used to provide that framework, and that too it is a open source. That means we don't have to spend any uh, money for license, or we don't have to spend any initial investment, at least to use Appium, right? So it is an open source test automation framework which will help us to automate the scenarios related to mobile testing. And it was developed by Dan Kuller, as I have already mentioned. It has a huge amount of users. Both you can see that in GitHub, and to our surprise, that it has the highest market share compared to all rest of the mobile automation framework providers or the automation tools. By this, we are just trying to explain the point that whatever options we have in the market, among all of them, Appium is the most used and the most trusted one. Why? Because as it is already there in the market for a long time, so you will get a good amount of community support also for Appium. And the help page and the help documents in the Appium website is also quite self-explanatory. If you try to read it and try to implement it, it would be quite easy. We don't have to worry about that, because in the further sessions we are going to install the Appium, and then we are going to design our test scripts with some mobile testing scenarios, and then we are going to execute it in our cloud devices and also in emulators and simulators. Okay, so next, with that point, move to our next question, that is why basically we need to use Appium. A small introduction I have already provided before, that it helps us to interact with the mobile actions, but that is kind of the minimal criteria for to be used as a mobile automation framework or tool. But in why Appium, what we try to understand, we are trying to understand that what are the benefits Appium is providing, which is helping us to make our tests automation design process more easier, or in simpler terms you can say what are the standout features of Appium, right? If we compare it with the competitors in the market, then what are the standout features provided by Appium? The first and the most important one is Appium is cross-platform. Cross-platform support means it supports different types of mobile operating system. For example, iOS and Android. As we all are aware that in market almost most of the users are from these two operating system, and Appium supports both of them. So how we are going to benefit it out of it? For example, you are designing a scenario, right? You are converting it into a test script. So now you have written a test script for Android. So for iOS, you don't have to design the test script again from scratch. You can reutilize the steps with just minimal changes and use it for the iOS. So that is one of the real-time and standout features which Appium is providing us, and it helps us to reduce the automation effort, and definitely the ROI of automation would be more better while we are using Appium. The next point is Appium supports multiple programming languages like Java, Ruby, Python and PHP. So I have already tried to mention all of the majorly used programming language while using Appium. Though in our session we are going to cover Appium with Java language, but see, the main benefit over here is your resource utilization. So whenever you are preparing a presentation, or you are preparing a POC on Appium, this is one of the most important point your managers will look into, right? Because we cannot assure that always we have resources of Java, Ruby or Python, but that's the beauty, right? If you have Python resources also, you can utilize them to use Appium. If you have Java resources also, you can utilize them to use Appium. So it is a very standout feature in terms of your resource utilization and your initial investment. You don't have to always go and hire employee of any specific language to use Appium. The next point is Appium handles emulators and simulators along with the real devices. So here we are not going to deep dive much into the emulators and simulators part. Why? Because in our third session, this is our first session, so in third session we are going to check that how basically we can set up an emulators, how we can basically set up an simulators. So those things we'll cover over there. But just to give you a brief idea about it, what happens, for example, you have a scenario where you need to execute your test automation script in iOS X, iOS 12, iOS 13, 3, right? 3 devices. Now in your project, you already have a iOS X, but you do not have iOS 11 or 12 or 13 maybe, right? Now the question is it worth to buy a new device just to execute the automation script? Because it sounds that the ROI will definitely get impacted if you invest a lot of your resources, for example your money, to buy a different type of devices. So in that case, what people do, they usually use emulators and simulators. Those are kind of your virtual devices. Okay, emulators and simulators are nothing but your virtual devices. Those virtual devices you can easily set up on your machine. You don't have to invest money to buy new devices every time whenever there is a requirement to support a different set of device which is not present in your device form, right? So this is a very nice thing, okay, because it's in realistic world it is not possible to buy all the devices, right? If your client is saying that they are going to support 4 to 5 series of Android, 4 to 5 series of iOS, then maybe 1 or 2 you can provide as a real device. Rest of the 3-4 you need to manage with emulators and simulators, because those virtual devices comes very handy. Execution is also quite smooth. Yes, there are some pros and cons of using emulators and simulators, but our point is not that. Our point is that Appium is giving us the flexibility to use emulators, simulators and real devices, right? So you don't have to worry if you are in a small organization or if you are in a bigger organization, you have device or you don't have device, you don't have to worry about that. You can, in fact, as Appium is open source and emulators you can create on your device, so in fact without any real devices also you can create a POC, right? Don't worry about that, we will cover it thoroughly in the third session, right? Next point is Appium supports automation for all apps. Okay, so Appium supports automation for all this type of app, but the thing is, first we need to understand that what basically we mean by native app, hybrid app and progressive web app. So in simple terms, native app is something when we design our application specific to operating system. That, what do we mean by that? That means when we are designing for Android, we will use platform specific language, for example Java. When we are designing for iOS, again we will use the platform specific language, for example Objective-C or Swift. So basically those apps are designed in that way, which are specific to their operating system. And some examples of native application is like your Facebook, right? Facebook is your native app. But what happens in hybrid applications? In hybrid applications, there is no platform specific language, right? But in fact, they use normal web app technologies. Web app technologies means your CSS, HTML, right? They use those kind of language to design their applications, right? But one thing you need to remember, that hybrid app also look wise it will look pretty much similar to native only. A typical example of hybrid app is Twitter, right? So Twitter is your typical example of hybrid applications. Now what happens in progressive web applications? In progressive web application, it is also quite similar to hybrid, but there is a big difference over here. It is kind of cross-platform web applications. What do we mean by that? Cross-platform web application. Apart from this cross-platform web application technology, one of the best thing about progressive web app is you can use it without internet also. It can be easily searchable in Google search. You can directly install it from Google search. You don't have to go to the app store for it, right? And the performance is also quite better in progressive web app. A typical example is your Flipboard applications. Okay, so hybrid and progressive web app is pretty much similar, but yes, using it without your kind of internet, and you without using your app store is kind of features which usually stand out. And there is also saying that the future is mostly related to progressive web app, but let's see how this one will means progress in future. But yes, our main topic is Appium, and Appium supports all these three kind of applications, right? Your native applications, hybrid application, progressive web application. Though as a tester you don't have to deep dive into it much, because you will get your respective IPA or APK, right, for testing, and you will just use it for your automation, right? But having knowledge on this a bit will definitely help you to understand more when you deep dive or participate in the architecture calls, right? When we have architecture calls, you can provide your inputs also if you have a brief idea on those different type of applications, right? So our next topic is how Appium works. Till now we have understood that basically what is Appium, what are the standout features of Appium, what are the benefits of using Appium, and how Appium is helping us to automate other test scenarios related to mobile application testing. Now we will try to understand that how it actually works, how basically Appium works behind the scene, right? And this is very important in terms of interview, right? Right. So because why in interview specifically, because they try to understand that we have basic understanding of Appium working or not. Before we deep dive into this and try to understand the image over here, that how basically Appium works, we should understand the client server architecture, because if we understand client server architecture, we will understand this image also easily. So what do you mean by client server architecture? In client server, what basically happens, there will be a request sent from client to the server. Server will process that request and send a response back to the client. Exactly the same thing happens in Appium architecture also. What happens? First we will design our test script in with our language, right, with our client libraries, using maybe Java, JavaScript or Python. So basically first the test script design will happen. Whenever we send a request, for example, you want to perform some action using the Appium methods, there those things basically converted into an API by JSON wire protocol. Whatever you are sending through test script, that is converting into an API using the JSON wire protocol, which will be understandable to Appium server. Now Appium server will receive this request, right, in terms of API, and then it will process it. Whenever it processes it, it basically decides that it will send it to UI Automator for Android or UI automation, Apple's UI automation for iOS. That means it basically helps process the JSON wire API sent from JSON wire protocol, and it helps to divides it into Android or iOS. So the processing basically happens to divide it into Android or iOS. Then it will go to Android or iOS accordingly. It will process your request and send the response back to the test running machine. That means it starts from test running machine, went through JSON wire protocol, converted into API, hit the Appium server, get processed over there, then diverted into Android or iOS accordingly, and then it perform the action and provide the response back to your test running machine, right? So whenever they ask in interview, try to explain it properly using multiple phases. Phases means one phase is JSON wire protocol, one phase is Appium server, one phase is diverting it into Android or iOS. So this slide is basically the points to note. What do we mean, or what are the topics we'll discuss in this one is whatever we have learned in the slides before, we will try to summarize all those things, and we will try to make a quick notes out of it, right? So that when you are trying to create a POC, or when you are trying to explore Appium, or you are going for an Appium interview, those notes will help you out, right? So till now we have seen that Appium is kind of a open source test automation framework, right, which is definitely free of cost, which is our first point in the left part, right? This one, correct, free of cost. So why? Because this is a test automation framework which is open source. Second is easy to learn and understand. Why it is easy to learn and understand? Because Appium works with client server architecture, and in IT industry most of us are aware of this client server architecture, so understanding Appium would be pretty easy. The second most important point is Appium, working with Appium is pretty much similar experience of working with Selenium. And all of the QA resources we have, out of that, most of the automation resource are aware of Selenium. So if you have a team who have prior knowledge in Selenium, it will be quite easy for them to work with Appium. So third one is complete automation. Why complete automation? Because Appium provides us lot of methods, lot of interfaces, which basically helps us to interact different kinds of mobile web elements, different kind of elements, different kind of buttons. So it basically at the end of the day helps us to provide a larger test coverage, right? And apart from that, it supports different kind of operating system like iOS, Android. So basically it helps us to support multiple operating system. It helps us to perform different kind of mobile application actions. And so at the end of the day, using this framework, we basically able to automate a larger number of test scenarios. That's why basically we call it as complete automation. Now versatile and flexible. Yes, it is versatile and flexible. Why? Because we can use it for different operating system. We can use it across all kind of emulators, simulators, real devices, cloud hosted real devices. So this is kind of a flexibility Appium is giving us, right? And one more point I want to add over here, flexibility also highlights the point where Appium helps us to use any kind of programming language we want, right? There is no restriction in terms of using programming language. So we can use programming language as Java, we can use JavaScript, Python, PHP, Ruby, right? This is kind of a flexibility. Compatible with all platforms. Yes, we have already discussed this point. It is compatible with multiple platforms. It supports Android, iOS, everything we basically use while performing mobile testing. Continuous integration. Yes, this is one of the point, guys. I want to take couple of minutes of yours on this particular point. Why? Because see, continuous integration is a major part of automation. If our automation suite is not part of CI/CD pipeline, then the ROI that we are expecting, we will never reach to that even. We are not able to get that. That is a different point. We are not even able to reach to that. Why? Because see, if your automation is not part of your pipeline, then your release cycle, how it is happening, your deployment, your releases, in that you are not using automation suite directly. That means whenever your developer is putting your code in your pipeline, after that your testing is not happening through automation, because your automation suite is not part of your pipeline, right? So the real benefits of faster release in agile methodology using CI/CD pipeline and automation will never be possible. That's why I have pointed it out over here, that continuous integration and Appium integration with CI/CD pipeline like Jenkins, Bamboo, Circle CI, TeamCity is very easy. Personally, I have used it with Jenkins and it took me half a day to integrate it thoroughly. And you can use any dependency management, okay, like Maven or Gradle, to design your Appium framework, and you can simply integrate that with your Jenkins. So this part is very important, because if your test automation framework or your automation tool is not providing you the option to integrate with CI/CD, then I would suggest, in the current agile methodology, we should avoid, or we should try to find a workaround for it, right? Or we should avoid those kind of tools and frameworks, because end of the day, when you will prepare your test report, when you will prepare your test ROI, it would be difficult for you to figure out that how your automation helped in release life cycle, right? In your release cycle, your automation should be definitely part of it. That's why CI, right? So I hope you guys understood that what is Appium, why we use Appium, or what are the standout features of Appium, and these features you can mention while creating POCs, right? And how Appium works, this one you will need while attending an interview or for your concept also, right? And then we have understood that what are the class notes or points to note, which will help us to give a brief and crisp knowledge about Appium. Before we will log out, let me tell you about what would be the next video. Our next video will mostly focused on installing Appium on your machine. So I will show you how to install, how to check the installation process and everything, right? And with that, we will start working on the emulators, right? We have discussed, right, that we will create an emulator of our own, and then we will design our framework. So the third and fourth session will be mostly focused on the emulators part, right? So you can also try lambdatest.com/blog website. Here you can get a lot of resources on Appium. In fact, I have written one blog on Appium tutorial. You can just search it in the lambdatest.com/blog and just type Appium tutorial. You can easily able to search it. In that tutorial also, I have explained each and everything with proper points, proper steps, and we will try to perform all those things in this video series, okay? And in fact, when we will proceed further in this series, I will show you how you can use Lambda Test Cloud devices for your automation purpose, right? Means how you can execute your test suite parallelly with different devices, which are real devices hosted in cloud. So that is a very standout features which will help you, which will save your time during your execution when you have a huge number of test cases in your regression test suite, right? So yes, and you can also try a different kind of certifications which Lambda Test is providing. And with that, hope you like the video, and do like and subscribe the channel, right, so that we can create more videos on Appium series, and which will help you to implement Appium in your framework, or you can try to prepare for a different experience of using test automation with mobile devices.